Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Tom.
We're talking about a concept that might sound new to you, but I bet you've seen it before. The word itself is very unusual. Skeuomorphism. So we're talking about when design or things that are made in life actually resemble something from the past. Sometimes it's done to help older people feel comfortable with new technology, or maybe it's just because people have fond memories of the things we had long ago. We're going to talk about going beyond the digital world. We kind of focused on that in day one, but day two has different things that we're going to discuss, different design objects.
Yep, there are lots of examples of things besides computers that we can discuss, which we'll do today, as you said. So let's get to it. Let's read through the contents of our lesson, and we'll be right back to discuss it.
Though digital products are where skeuomorphism is most apparent, this design tactic isn't just found in the digital sphere. Real-world objects also retain obsolete features that imitate the earlier, functional versions they were modeled on. Blue jeans, for example, have a smaller pocket that was originally intended for a pocket watch, although such watches have been out of style for a century. They also have brass rivets at pocket corners, which would have previously reinforced the seams, but are now unnecessary thanks to modern stitching techniques. The sound of a revving engine in an electric car or scooter is also skeuomorphic, as its only purpose is making the vehicle sound like its non-electric predecessors. Likewise, manufacturers add visual features like cooling grills in order for the car not to look strange. Even early cars kept the boxy shape and wooden panels of the horse-drawn carriages they were replacing. These features helped to attract potential purchasers by speaking a visual language they understood. Steve Jobs had a fair point that skeuomorphism helps people comprehend new products easily and is thus valuable for those who are new to certain features. However, this design approach isn't universally liked. Many designers find it lazy to rely on skeuomorphism, as it restricts creativity by demanding realism. It can also result in impractical design, when the features being imitated from the original item limit the new product's flexibility. This is not to mention that many people find digital skeuomorphic design elements unappealing compared to other styles. While this design approach has its uses, it also certainly has its limitations in the world of product design.
Okay, let's continue to talk about skeuomorphism when art imitates life. And remember, we were talking about how apps on the screen of your phone are represented by these little icons, and there'll be pictures of devices in the past. And even though these devices are not being used, when you use your smartphone, they still kind of let us know what the function of the program is. That's basically what skeuomorphism is, but it also applies to other things in life, as we're going to talk about today. So here our lesson begins on the second day of our lesson here. Though digital products are where skeuomorphism is most apparent, where it's most obvious, this design tactic isn't just found in the digital sphere. So I did say apparent here. That just means it seems to be the case. It seems obvious. Yes, it seems to be most apparent that digital products are where you see skeuomorphism the most. It's most apparent there. It's mostly clear there. But it isn't only found in the digital realm or the digital sphere. Now, the word sphere does refer to a circle that is three-dimensional, like the Earth is a sphere. Or, a tennis ball is a sphere. But in this particular case, it just refers to the world of computers.
Yeah, you can use sphere, though, to talk about the world of something, in the pottery sphere. Sometimes people will use it like that, too, like in the pottery world. So instead of saying world, they might say sphere. So, yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing. You might see that sometimes. Real world objects also keep. That's what retain means, to keep. Obsolete features that imitate the earlier functional versions they were modeled on. If something's obsolete, it's no longer produced. Maybe it's out of date. It's not used much anymore. I still have some cassette tapes in my apartment that are pretty much obsolete nowadays. I had to find someone who still had a cassette tape player that could turn them into a digital form for me. Thank goodness. So, yeah, these are obsolete features that imitate or look like the earlier functional versions. If something's functional, it works right. You can actually use it. I have a tape recorder player. How do you say that?
Tape player, maybe?
A tape player. Well, yeah, but it has to be a cassette tape that is still functional. It still works. So functional can also mean something is working the way it's supposed to. Now, a version, you guys see this word a lot. We have different versions of software. We have different versions of reports you might write for class. Your first draft is one version. You might make a second version, and then the final version is the one you turn in. So it's just one of several that you produce, and hopefully the versions, as they change over time, get better, but who knows? Not always, huh?
Yeah, of course, there's going to be a new version of Windows coming out soon, or maybe it has already come out after this program is aired. But I guess that's Windows 11, right? That's the new version of Windows. But we've got some functional versions of various things that we're going to talk about. Let's talk about blue jeans, for example, or as you guys say, 牛仔裤. Blue jeans, for example, have a smaller pocket that was originally intended for a pocket watch, although such watches have been out of style for a century. So before wrist watches, people had pocket watches, which they carried with them, and if they needed to know the time, they would pull it out of their pocket, and it would be attached to their trousers, I guess, with a chain.
Yeah.
There'd be a chain there. So actually, I was given a pocket watch from my grandfather many years ago.
Really?
I guess it might be worth something. I don't know.
Cool.
But in any case, there's a little pocket. I think it's inside the right front pocket. There's a smaller pocket inside that pocket. That was designed for a pocket watch, and nobody uses those anymore. And that pocket in there is too small for your smartphone. Although I have found a very useful use for that. I can put earplugs in that little pocket because I usually wear earplugs when I'm out in Taipei. It's just so darn noisy out there.
Yeah, that's a good use for that pocket. It's tiny. I remember when I was in college, I wore 501s, those are Levi's jeans, to school almost every day, and I would put coins in that little tiny pocket, and I would buy things in the vending machine to eat. That's what I use that pocket for. They also have something called brass rivets. They're little brass kind of buttons. They're not really a button, but that's kind of what it looks like. And they are found at the pocket corners. Now, originally, they were supposed to make the seams, that's the stitching, stronger so that the seams wouldn't rip so easily. Back then, the sewing machine had been invented, but it was fairly new, and it didn't have all of the, as we say, bells and whistles, all the cool features that we have today. So they would put these brass metal objects on the pocket corners to keep the seams from ripping. Now here we're using the word reinforce. If you reinforce something, you make it stronger. It doesn't have to be an object. Maybe you're a teacher and you want to reinforce what you've been teaching, so you'll review it again. Make sure the kids understand it. That's also the meaning of reinforce. So here, previously reinforced, past tense, the seams. But now this is really unnecessary thanks to modern stitching techniques, but now we think they look cool. So in particular, Levi's, which is the first company that actually produced blue jeans, they're the ones who still have these brass rivets and these little pockets. Now, other companies who produce blue jeans don't necessarily have those features.
Exactly, but I guess you can still find them on the Levi's jeans, and they're kind of fashionable, and they look cool. So even though they are unnecessary, even though they are no longer useful, they're still there because they look cool. And, of course, we've got the stitching technique, so the seams can stay together. A seam, of course, is where one piece of cloth meets another one, and they have to be sewn together. Now, in the next paragraph here, it says, the sound of a revving engine in an electric car or scooter is also skeuomorphic, as its only purpose is making the vehicle sound like its non-electric predecessors. So we're talking about an electric car or an electric scooter, okay? And yes, they are silent. Sometimes you hear them coming, but that sound is totally artificial. That sound is not necessary for the operation of the electric car or of the scooter. It just makes the vehicle sound like its predecessors. A predecessor is something that came before, so of course gasoline-powered cars were the predecessors of electric cars.
Yeah, and remember, in day one, we learned the word to precede. If you precede something, you're the first to come, or you're the person right before whatever you're talking about. We're going to listen to our Chinese teacher for a while, guys. Just a few minutes, and then we'll be back to keep talking about some of these other ways that skeuomorphism has been used in design. Stay tuned.
听众朋友大家好，我是安娜。我们昨天提到了一个设计的概念叫做 skeuomorphism， 拟真的设计，也就是艺术呢是模仿我们真实的生活。不过这篇文章呢，接着昨天提到的，我们昨天提到的这些拟真设计的设计策略，大概都是一些在数位方面的 digital sphere、digital field。但是今天我们看到，其实生活当中也有很多的设计都是用这种拟真设计的策略。我们刚刚提到的这个所谓的过时特征，模仿之前的设计，在第一段第二句的地方出现了关系子句哦。先行词是 obsolete features， 过时的一些特征，后面的 that 一直到句尾的地方先左右括号。那么它是一个限定用法的关系子句，不过在这个关系子句当中，还有另外一个关系子句是省略了关系词汇取或者是 that。 先行词有点长，先行词在整个括号里面，请你找 the earlier functional versions， 后面的 they 到句尾再左右括号。好，接下来的第三句也有限定用法的关系子句哦，在一开始前面的地方 a smaller pocket， 这地方可以划线，它是先行词，后面的 that 一直到逗点同样左右括号，限定用法。原本是用来放 pocket watch 怀表的一个比较小的一个 pocket 口袋，逗点之后出现了连接词的 although， 才可以让句子变得这么长。不过同样这一段的第四句也出现了关系子句哦，which 一直到句尾的地方，前面打了一个逗点，表示只是补充说明，所以逗点前面先行词brass rivets at pocket corners， 那么牛仔裤呢，在口袋角落也有黄铜的柳钉，补充说明。而这些黄铜柳钉啊，其实也就是之前要做加强，不过现在不需要了。好，那么除了衣服之外，车子也有拟真设计哦。比如说像电动车或者是电动机车，引擎在转的声音其实也是拟真的，也是模仿之前汽车的引擎在运转时候的声音。那么同样在这句话当中，第二段的第一句，我们在逗点之后看到一个 as， 这里的 as 当连接词是 when because 还是如同好像呢？根据上下文的文意推断，这里的 as 是作为 because。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Okay, let's continue to talk about skeuomorphism. We talked about some examples in the real world. And these are examples that are not in the computer world. We talked about the extra pocket in blue jeans. We talked about that little rivet that jeans still have. Those things are not necessary, but the jeans still have them. And then we talked about the sounds that these electric cars and these electric scooters make. That is an example of skeuomorphic things. And, of course, that's the revving sound of an engine of a car powered by gasoline. And, of course, with electric scooters like Gogoro or whatever, that's artificial. Those scooters would not normally make a sound like that. And likewise, manufacturers add visual features like cooling grills in order for the car not to look strange. Now, a cooling grill is in the front of the car, and with a gasoline-powered car, air goes in there to help cool the engine or to cool the radiator there, so your engine does not overheat. And electric cars don't need to have that grill on the front of the car, but they still put something like it there anyway. Otherwise, the car would just look really weird.
Yeah, because you're used to seeing it, right? So even early cars kept the boxy shape and wooden panels of the horse-drawn carriages they were replacing. I talked about a little of this at the beginning of the program. Yeah, if you go back and you look at the early cars that Ford designed, they kind of look boxy. So they're shaped in a square shape. And a lot of them actually had wooden panels in the inside of them, in the interior. If they had roofs, not all of them had roofs. Some of those early ones, didn't even have roofs. Kind of a scary vehicle to ride in back then, I understand. Now, a panel can be different things. So a panel here, though, they're talking about rectangular pieces of wood that we'll often put on the walls as decoration. I love wood paneling. I think it's beautiful. Or if you look at your floor, a lot of people have panels that make up their wood flooring as well, if it's real. So these are the wood panels that they're talking about. The reason they did them is, again, they kind of reminded people of the horse-drawn carriages that they were replacing. The carriages were those old-fashioned things that people would sit in. They had wheels, of course, and they were pulled by horses. If they had a lot of money, they would have a driver that would sit outside and, direct the horses where to go. Some of them didn't have a lot of money, so they probably were helping the horse know where to go themselves. So these features help to attract potential purchasers, people who bought them, by speaking a visual language they understood. So when they saw what was being sold, they go, oh, yeah, I get that. And they felt more confident, more comfortable in purchasing what was then a really revolutionary sort of a vehicle for them.
Yeah, the new gasoline-powered cars did not need to look like horse-drawn carriages at all.
No.
But they still made them look like horse-drawn carriages anyway, because people would understand that is a mode of transportation, even though it uses gasoline and not horsepower. Now, let's get back to Steve Jobs here. He had a fair point that skeuomorphism helps people comprehend new products easily and is thus valuable for those who are new to certain features. And I think for me, for someone who lived in the world without computers, the transition was kind of difficult because there were lots of new concepts to understand. So that could have been useful back then for people like me. But nowadays, I think most people live in the digital world, and we may not need that stuff anymore. Everybody pretty much understands how these things work.
Yeah, so let's talk about some other things that have changed. Yeah, I kind of think it's kind of cool. I still like old-fashioned things, so I'm kind of a fan of the skeuomorphism myself. So we don't really need them like we used to. However, this design approach isn't universally liked. Some people hate it. Probably younger people and probably designers themselves. Designers are quite creative, of course. That's why they go into that field. They're very creative. And they probably want to come up with something brand new. They don't want to copy somebody else's stuff or make it look like it's, still being used in the olden days. So creativity, you just have really great ideas that come to you in your mind. People who are creative can be anybody, actually. It's just using your imagination and coming up with original ideas. We tend to say artists are creative, but you know what? There are creative people who work coding computer codes. A lot of people can be creative. You just have to use your imagination.
Exactly. So, yes, if you're creative, you have a lot of creativity. And, of course, this particular concept of skeuomorphism is being criticized by people, and they say it restricts or limits creativity because it demands realism. So, like if you're trying to design a digital camera or something, you might be thinking, why do I have to design this camera so that it looks like an old film camera? They're not the same thing. But as you know, modern digital cameras look very much like the old Canons and the old Nikons. They look very much like those film cameras. Even though digital cameras don't really need to look like that. They could be shaped a different way or have different functionality. But again, now you got to make it look like a camera because cameras have always looked like that and people are used to that. So yeah, that's criticism here. It just restricts that creativity and it demands realism.
Yeah, so this is not to mention that many people find digital skeuomorphic design elements unappealing, so they don't even like them. Something's unappealing, it's not very attractive to you. Now, usually we use this phrase not to mention kind of in the middle of two phrases, right? Not to mention, and this is something we want to mention because it's pretty important. So this is not to mention, so we're doing more than just casually mentioning it. It's kind of an important point that a lot of people just don't like these skeuomorphic design elements. You could also say this is not to say that, this is true. Anyway, this is not to mention. How would you describe this particular phrase, Tom, if you were describing it?
Right. Well, we're also just adding something to what we originally said. And you could say that if you're talking about somebody, I could say, hey, my friend Dave is very good at foreign languages. Not to mention, he is a very hard worker. So if you hire him and you want to do international business, you'll probably have a very good employee. So yes, we use this when we talk about listing things. It is one way and not to mention something else. And usually when we say not to mention, it seems like that thing is pretty important to mention. It might be the most important thing to mention. So, yes, here we're saying we can't forget to mention or we can't forget to say that many people find digital skeuomorphic design elements unappealing compared to other styles. So yeah, nowadays, of course, people might be looking at these icons on their phones or they'll be looking at Levi's jeans and they'll be wondering, what the heck do we need that extra pocket for? It's silly, it's stupid, it's dumb. Get rid of it. I need more room in my pocket to put my smartphone. Can't you put maybe another pocket in my jeans that's big enough to fit my smartphone or something like that? These people might be thinking that, yeah, skeuomorphism is just too much stuck in the past.
Yeah, if you try to buy a pair of 501s, which are classic Levi jeans, you're not going to have enough room to put your smartphone in your pockets, for sure. So, yeah, it's an interesting subject. I can see how designers want to go their own way, kind of blaze their own trail and not follow other people. But in some ways, it really is smart in a marketing way just to stick with what people are familiar and comfortable with. That's it for today, guys. We're going to listen one more time to our Chinese teacher, and then we'll be back to wrap this particular unit up.
那么同样的啊，为了要让汽车看起来不陌生，就会添加一些什么进气栅格啊、格栅啦这一些比较视觉的特征，而且是早期的汽车啊，也有保留在之前那种马车箱型跟木板这样子的一个设计，所以呢，感觉上就比较能够接受汽车这个东西了。在第二段当中，我们特别注意一下，第三句也有2个关系子句。第三句的第一个关系子句呢，先行词有点长，从 the boxy shape 一直到 carriages， 这整个划线起来。先行词从 they 到后面的 replacing 的地方。那当然，前面的冠带 which 或者是 that 是做一个省略。那么后面呢，还有一个关系子句，先行词在最后面 a visual language 这里。那么关系子句从 they 一直到句尾，就这2个字。They understood。 不过在这里的关系词 which 或 that 也省略了，为什么呢？因为关系词 which 或 that 如果在括号里的关系子句当成括号里关系子句本身的受词，就可以作为一个省略。比如说我们刚刚提到的 They were replacing， replace 取代什么东西呢？就是先行词，也就是这个冠带，当受词可以省略。最后面的 they understood， 他们了解什么呢？就是先行词 a visual language， 也就是冠带 which 或 that。 所以当成受词的时候，当然就可以做一个省略。好，不过呢，第3段我们特别提到啦 Steve Jobs， 当然这个观点是非常合理的啦，也就是说拟真的设计可以让大家可以轻松的了解新产品。在最后第3段的第1句的地方，我们特别注意一下哦，A fair point 后面 that 一直到 easily 的地方，在这里的 that 是连接词，可是它不是关系子句哦，它是没有意义的连接词，连接一个所谓的补语，补充说明这个合理的观点是什么东西。那么接下来同样这一句呢，我们看到很熟悉的 those who 一直到句尾，当然这里有一个关系子句。不过呢，有一些设计师啊，就是觉得说好像呢这个拟真设计也有缺点，因为这样很偷懒耶，反而都是现实风格，就没有所谓的 creativity， 就没有创造力啦。然后也有一些人会觉得说，好像这样子的话，拟真数位的这种元素就比较 unappealing， 比较没有设计。不过虽然这种设计方法也有它的用途，但是呢，在产品的设计的领域上也是有一些局限啦。那么句子呢，我们来看一下第3段最后一句的地方，一开始的 while， 并不是看到 while 就是 when 哦，因为 while 本身有 although 的意思，虽然如何如何，所以这完全是要根据上下文的文意才能够做判断。所以如果听众朋友你也是从事设计的，你觉得拟真设计真的很好吗？还是你觉得它真的有些限制呢？以上是我们今天的内容，我是安娜，我们下次见。
Okay, that brings us to the end of our lesson for today, and we're also at the end of our total unit here on skeuomorphism, and hopefully you all know what this word means and you understand the concept, and I think this might be very useful for those of you who are entering the world of design, and it is very important to know that this is going on, and maybe you like it, maybe you don't, but in any case, it's still around and still very important.Please join us again next time when we talk about another fascinating subject for your listening pleasure. From all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.